Robert took the contract, his eyes scanning the faded ink. His face went pale as a ghost. Ooh, Karen, this. This says his land's exempt from HOA rules. And he hesitated, swallowing hard. He technically controls the county's utilities. Roads, water, power. The crowd gasped. Karen's smirk vanished. That's impossible, she snapped, snatching the paper. But the truth was right there, in black and white. I'd been her puppet master all along, and she had no idea. Keep going, she barked at the drivers. But they hesitated, glancing at Martinez. Evelyn stepped up, her voice shaky but firm. While you're at it, Karen, explain where the $500,000 for road improvements went. I've got bank records. Your company got every cent, but our potholes are still here. The neighbors murmured, phones raised, live streams buzzing. Karen's heels wobbled as she backed away. That's slander, she squealed, but the damage was done. Martinez crossed his arms. Got a warrant here, Karen. You and Robert need to come with us. Financial fraud's a big deal. Her jaw dropped, penalty book slipping from her hands. The crowd erupted in cheers as deputies escorted her to the cruiser. Robert trailing behind, muttering excuses. I turned to the bulldozer drivers. You can shut those off now, boys. Garden's staying. They nodded, engines dying with a low whine. But Karen wasn't done. That night, my security cameras caught her and Robert sneaking into my yard, armed with shovels. They hacked at my zucchini patch like petty thieves, dirt flying everywhere. I watched the footage the next morning, chuckling over my coffee. Big mistake, Karen. I sent it straight to Martinez and the local news. By noon, Channel 5 was airing HOA president caught red-handed, destroying neighbor's garden. Twitter exploded. Karen the bully trended for days. The next week, I called an emergency neighborhood meeting at the community center. Every seat was packed. Folks I hadn't seen in years showed up. I laid out the contract, Evelyn shared her bank records, and neighbors spilled their own HOA horror stories. Mr. Chen showed photos of his fine herb garden. Mrs. Rodriguez cried about a $300 penalty for her grandson's bike. We voted right there. HOA dissolved, 88-5. Karen's two cronies didn't even dare show their faces. Martinez's team dug deeper. Turns out Karen and Robert had siphoned over $500,000 into their shell company. Arrests followed fast. Fraud, embezzlement, even a vandalism charge from my garden stunt. Karen's house got seized, sold at auction to a young couple who planted sunflowers the day they moved in. We got refunds for years of unfair fines, and I used my county pool to fix those potholes Karen ignored. The neighborhood changed overnight. Without HOA breathing down our necks, folks started painting their mailboxes wild colors, stringing up lights, planning whatever they damn well pleased. We rebuilt my driveway, farmed together. Evelyn brought carrot seeds, Mr. Chen donated tomato steaks. It became our community garden, a big green middle finger to Karen's reign. Kids ran around laughing, no fines in sight. A month later, I harvested my first post-war tomato. Bright red, juicy, perfect. Evelyn sat with me on my porch, sipping lemonade. Matthew, she said, her eyes twinkling, you didn't just save your garden, you saved us all. I looked out at the street, neighbors chatting over fences, kids biking, sunflowers nodding in the breeze. Karen was gone, her tyranny a fading memory. The news vans had moved on, but our victory stuck. Last week, I got a call from a producer. They're making a docu-series about rogue HOAs, and we're episode 1. Property values up 30% since Karen left. Turns out people love freedom more than uniformity. As I filed away the old contract, my phone buzzed. A text from a neighbor down the road. HOA's gone, but my new peppers need advice. Help? I grinned. This wasn't just my win. It was ours. And that, folks, is how you turn 2 bulldozers into a revolution. Thanks for sticking around. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed watching Karen's empire crumble. Next time, I'll tell you about the guy who beat an HOA with a single beehive. Trust me, it's wild. See you then.
Before we continue the story, where in the world are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to tap that little like button to motivate us to create more exciting stories.
You won't believe what happened when our petty HOA president, Karen, decided to block my driveway farm with not one, but two bulldozers, all because my vegetable garden didn't fit her perfect little vision of neighborhood uniformity. She thought she could steamroll over me, literally. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just some retired guy with a green thumb. I'm Matthew, a former judge who quietly controls the entire county's infrastructure, and this was about to become the biggest mistake of her HOA career. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you love seeing entitled Karens get what they deserve. It started on a crisp Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee in my kitchen when the peace was shattered by the deafening rumble of heavy engines. I rushed to the window, mug still in hand, and my jaw dropped. Two hulking yellow bulldozers sat right across my driveway, their metal blades glinting in the sunlight like some kind of twisted war machines. And there she was, Karen, our HOA dictator, standing in my front yard, arms crossed, her blonde hair perfectly teased, her designer jacket screaming money. She smirked like she'd already won. My little driveway farm, rows of tomatoes, carrots, and zucchini I'd spent months tending, was in her crosshairs. I'd turned my front yard into a garden after retiring from the bench. It wasn't just a hobby. It was my peace after decades of courtroom battles. But Karen, she hated it. Last month, she'd slapped a bright red violation notice on my door. Unauthorized landscaping violates community standards. I'd explained at the HOA meeting that this was my land, my right, but she just waved her little black penalty book and said, "We need uniformity, Matthew. Your dirt patch is dragging down property values." Property values? Please. She didn't care about that. She just loved the power trip. That morning, I stormed outside, my boots crunching on the gravel. "Karen, what the hell is this?" I shouted, pointing at the bulldozers. She turned, her heels sinking into my lawn, and flashed that fake smile I'd come to despise. "Oh, Matthew, good morning." The board approved an emergency removal. "Your so-called farm is an eyesore." She handed me a crumpled paper. Another fine, $1,000 this time. I glanced at it, then back at the machines revving their engines. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. Years on the bench taught me to play the long game. See, Karen didn't know who she was messing with. I'd retired as a county judge 5 years ago, but what I'd kept quiet was an old family contract from 1973. My grandfather had bought up most of this land, roads, power lines, water pipes, and left it to me. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property, and better yet, I had legal leverage over the entire neighborhood's infrastructure. For years, I'd let Karen's petty rules slide, but this was war. I watched her strut back to the bulldozers, barking orders at the drivers. "Start it up," she yelled, her voice shrill over the engine's growl. My garden's fate hung by a thread, but I wasn't about to let her win. I pulled out my phone and dialed my old friend, Sheriff Martinez. "Hey, Mike, got a situation here. Can you swing by?" Then I texted Evelyn, my neighbor across the street. She'd been fined $300 last year for her Too Blue mailbox, and she'd been itching for payback ever since. As the bulldozers lurched forward, their treads tearing into my grass, neighbors started peeking out. Old Mr. Chen clutched his cane, shaking his head. Mrs. Rodriguez filmed from her porch, her grandkids whispering behind her. They'd all felt Karen's wrath, fines for Christmas lights, threats over unmowed lawns. But no one dared speak up. Not yet. I grabbed my leather briefcase from inside, the one I hadn't touched since retirement, and flipped it open on my porch. Inside, the 1973 contract, yellowed but ironclad. Karen didn't notice Evelyn hobbling over, her silver hair glinting in the sun. She carried a thick folder, years of HOA dirt she'd collected. "Matthew," she whispered, "I've got receipts. Karen's been skimming dues for her own pockets." I grinned. Perfect timing, Elle. Just then, the first bulldozer's blades scraped my tomato plants, and I heard the sickening crunch of snapping vines. My stomach twisted, but I stayed calm. This wasn't over. Karen spun around when she heard sirens in the distance. Sheriff Martinez's cruiser rolled up, lights flashing, followed by a black SUV, Robert Taylor, the HOA's lawyer. She waved her penalty book like a shield. This is private property enforcement, Sheriff. You've got no business here. Martinez tipped his hat. We'll see about that, ma'am. I stepped forward, contract in hand. Actually, Karen, you might want to read this before you dig yourself deeper.
If you find the situation in this story interesting, please press the like button, and if you want to hear similar stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting story.